I was standing in my future mother-in-law's hallway, reaching for the coat I had left behind, when I heard the exact date and time my financial ruin was scheduled to begin. I walked back inside, an excited bride-to-be, but left with a recording that would incinerate their entire bloodline. My name is Haley, and I am 27 years old. I built a highly lucrative user experience design agency from absolutely nothing, rising from the foster care system to owning a gorgeous Tahoe lake house and a sleek downtown loft. But none of my business acumen prepared me for the ultimate scam, artists disguised as my future family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic people who thought you were just an easy target. It was a crisp Thursday evening, exactly 48 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle and say I do to Spencer. He was 29, a charismatic insurance broker who always seemed so grounded, so supportive of my demanding career. I had just finished having an elaborate dinner with him and his mother Beverly at her upscale suburban home. I had said my goodbyes, walked out to my car, and realized the evening chill required the beige trench coat I had draped over Beverly's entryway bench. I unlocked the heavy oak front door as quietly as possible, not wanting to disturb them or drag out another long, exhausting goodbye. I stepped onto the polished marble foyer. My hand was inches from the fabric of my coat when the sound of clinking wine glasses and Beverly's sharp, venomous voice drifted from the kitchen. I froze completely, and my hand remained suspended in midair. Just make sure that little orphan signs the marriage certificate by 10 on Saturday morning. Beverly instructed, her tone devoid of the sugary sweetness she always used when speaking directly to me. With this state's community, property laws, her tech agency, and that gorgeous Tahoe lake house will finally be half yours. I am already planning the renovations. I am moving into the master suite, and Maddox gets her downtown loft. It is about time this family elevated its living situation. We have tolerated her lack of pedigree long enough for this payoff. A cold, familiar laugh echoed against the kitchen tiles. It was Spencer, the man who kissed my forehead every morning and told me I was his soulmate. Just 48 more hours of pretending I love her. Boring, rustic aesthetic. Mom, he chuckled, the sound hitting my chest like a physical blow. I am so sick of hearing about user interfaces and her humble beginnings. But once that ink dries, my $400,000 crypto debt is about to be wiped clean. Her business accounts are absolutely loaded. She will not even notice a few strategic withdrawals until it is far too late to back out. We just need to keep up the loving family act a little bit longer. Any other bride might have burst into the kitchen demanding answers. Any other woman might have screamed, thrown the coat, or confronted them while sobbing hysterically. I did not do any of those things. Growing up without a safety net teaches you many harsh lessons, but the most important one is pure survival. You do not show your enemy that you are bleeding. You quietly gather your weapons. I slowly lowered my hand from the coat. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. My thumb tapped the voice memo application and I hit record. I stood there in the shadows of the hallway, scarcely breathing, letting the sensitive microphone capture every single damning word. My analytical brain kicked into overdrive, separating the emotional betrayal from the logistical threat. Beverly continued to brag about how easily they had manipulated the girl with no family to protect her. Spencer joked about how gullible I was, how eagerly I craved their acceptance. I let the recording run for 3 full minutes, ensuring their voices were crystal clear. Once I had enough undeniable proof, I silently stopped the recording, saved the audio file to a secure cloud folder, grabbed my trench coat and slipped back out the front door. The heavy latch clicked shut without making a single sound. I walked down the long paved driveway to my car, my steps measured and deliberate. The cool night air hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing. No tears, no panic, just a freezing, calculated rage spreading through my veins. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the leather steering wheel, staring blankly at the dark street ahead. Suddenly, the screen of my phone lit up, vibrating aggressively against the center console. I glanced down. It was a text message from Spencer. Miss you already. Beautiful. Thank you for signing the prenup yesterday to prove our love is real. You are my everything. Counting the hours until you are my wife. I stared at the glowing words in the dark cabin of my car. My breathing slowed as a terrifying realization washed over me. The prenuptial agreement. Spencer's lawyer had sent it over last week, framing it as a standard formality to protect both of our premarital assets. He had specifically told me it was just a boilerplate document designed to keep things simple. I trusted him. I trusted the man I was about to marry. I looked back at the house where my future husband and mother-in-law were currently drinking wine and celebrating my impending financial ruin. I read his message again. Prove our love is real. My mind raced backward to yesterday afternoon in the lawyer's office, remembering the thick stack of papers and the rushed explanations. I felt completely sick to my stomach. What exactly did I sign yesterday? I needed to know the truth now. My name is Haley, and I am 27 years old. I built a highly lucrative user experience design agency from absolutely nothing, rising from the foster care system to owning a gorgeous Tahoe lake house and a sleek downtown loft. But none of my business acumen prepared me for the ultimate scam artist disguised as my future family. I was standing quietly in my future mother-in-law's hallway, reaching for the winter coat I had left behind, when I finally heard the exact date and time my total financial ruin was scheduled to begin. I walked back inside an excited bride-to-be, but left with a recording that would incinerate their entire bloodline. My foot pressed heavily on the gas pedal. The engine roared as I navigated the winding suburban roads away from Beverly's house. On the dashboard screen, Spencer's face flashed alongside his incoming call. I stared at his perfect smile, the one that had convinced me I finally had a real family, and hit decline. The phone lit up again. Another call. Another decline. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was clear. I reached for the digital console and accessed my saved voicemails, scrolling back to exactly 1 week ago. The voice of Spencer's attorney filled the car cabin, sounding remarkably casual. Hey Haley, just sending over the final draft of the prenup. Like Spencer said, it is just standard boilerplate stuff. What is yours is yours. What is his is his. We are keeping it simple for state requirements. Just review the first few pages and sign page 12 when you come in tomorrow. No need to bring Monica, it will take 2 seconds. I hit pause. The memory of that rushed signing hit me like a physical blow. Spencer had picked me up for a lunch date right before the appointment. He spilled iced tea all over my blouse, creating a chaotic distraction. I walked into his lawyer's office flustered, worried about being late for my afternoon client pitch. Spencer stood right behind my chair, kissing my neck, pointing directly to the signature line on page 12. I signed it without reading the final printed copy because Monica and I had already approved the digital draft 3 days prior. I had trusted my future husband. I trusted the man who claimed he loved my independence. I had been completely blind to the trap closing around me. I slammed on the brakes as a traffic light turned red. I needed to see exactly what I had put my name on. I merged onto the highway, pushing the speed limit all the way downtown. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the legal district, barely parking within the lines before grabbing my bag and sprinting toward the elevators. The silver doors slid open, and I marched straight past the reception desk. "Excuse me, Haley. You cannot just go back there," the receptionist called out, startled by my sudden appearance. I ignored her entirely and pushed open the heavy glass door to Monica's private office. Monica looked up from her dual monitors, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She had been my corporate attorney since I launched my agency. She was the only person who had watched me build my wealth from a cheap laptop in a foster care apartment to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. "Haley, what is wrong?" Monica asked instantly, dropping her pen onto her desk. "You look like you have seen a ghost. Are you okay?" Pull up the digital copy of the prenup I signed yesterday, I demanded, my voice sharp and breathless. Now. Monica did not hesitate. She sensed the absolute panic radiating from my posture. She quickly typed on her keyboard, accessing the secure legal portal where Spencer's team had uploaded the finalized executed document. I reviewed the draft we approved on Tuesday, Monica said while the file loaded. Complete asset protection. A solid firewall around your agency and the Tahoe property. You are completely insulated from his personal finances. Bring up the executed copy, I insisted, stepping around her desk to stare directly at her monitor. Go to page 12. Monica scrolled down the PDF document. As her eyes scanned the dense legal text of the final executed page, I watched her expression drop. The professional calm vanished, replaced by pure shock. She leaned closer to the monitor, her mouth slightly open. Haley, she started, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Page 12 was swapped. This is not the document we approved. Read it to me, I commanded, crossing my arms tightly against my chest to hide the shaking in my hands. Read exactly what I signed. Monica highlighted a thick paragraph of text that had not been there on Tuesday. There is a hidden clause here. She read, her tone laced with deep disbelief. It states that any increase in the valuation of your tech agency post-marriage automatically grants Spencer 50% equity of that growth. It also reclassifies your business accounts as commingled funds the moment the marriage certificate is filed with the county. They swapped the page right before I signed it, I said, my voice eerily calm in the quiet office. Spencer's lawyer was in on the entire scam. They knew I would not double-check a document my own attorney had already approved. Monica's hands flew across her keyboard with furious speed. This is entirely fraudulent. We can contest this in court immediately. The ethical violations alone will get his attorney disbarred and possibly facing criminal charges. Suddenly, Monica stopped typing. The silence in the office became heavy and suffocating. Monica stared at the screen, her eyes wide with a new, terrifying discovery. She slowly turned her heavy leather office chair to face me, her face completely pale. Haley, she asked, did you authorize a home equity line of credit on your Tahoe property this morning? I stared at Monica, the words ringing in my ears like a foreign language. A home equity line of credit. On my Tahoe lake house, I practically climbed over her desk to look at the monitor. I have not authorized any loan, I stated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. I own that property completely outright. I paid for it in cash 3 years ago. I have not spoken to a loan officer in over 6 months. Why would I ever leverage my own safe haven? Monica's fingers flew across her mechanical keyboard, the rapid clicking echoing in the tense silence of the room. She bypassed the standard client dashboard and logged directly into the secure banking portal she used to monitor my corporate and personal asset health. The screen refreshed, pulling up a master ledger of pending transactions. There it was. A blinding, undeniable line item sitting right in the approval queue. $400,000. The exact amount of Spencer's underground crypto debt. The exact amount he had just bragged about wiping clean while sipping wine in his mother's kitchen. My chest tightened so severely I felt my ribs might crack, but I forced oxygen deep into my lungs. The loan application had been filed digitally just 3 hours ago, right around the time Spencer told me he was stuck in back-to-back client meetings. The status indicator blinked in bright orange letters, pending final verification. Open the attached application file, I commanded, leaning so close to the monitor I could see the pixels. Monica clicked the PDF icon and a massive document filled the screen. We scrolled straight past the dense terms and conditions, stopping dead at the bottom of page 10. Staring back at me was my own signature. It was a digital stamp perfectly mimicking the stylized cursive I used for all my major business contracts. But it was a complete forgery. I traced my finger over the cold glass of the monitor. Monica hovered her mouse over the digital footprint tracking. The timestamp on the IP address originated directly from Spencer's downtown insurance brokerage firm. How is this even remotely possible without my physical identification or a notary present? I demanded the reality of his deep structural deception, making my blood run completely cold. He is not just a liar, he is a financial predator. Monica leaned back in her heavy leather chair, crossing her arms, as her brilliant legal mind dissected the crime in real time. He is using his position as an insurance broker to bypass the usual identity checks with a buddy at the bank. Monica stated, her tone laced with absolute professional disgust. He handles high net worth insurance policies all the time. He knows exactly how the underwriters operate, what loopholes exist in the digital verification process, and he clearly has an inside contact, pushing this massive application through the approval queue without flagging your primary phone number for authorization. She turned her chair to face me directly, grabbing my hand with a firm, grounding grip. Haley, listen to me very carefully. If you walk down that aisle and say I do on Saturday, this debt instantly becomes a marital liability. The moment that marriage certificate is filed with the county clerk, his $400,000 fraudulent loan becomes your mutual legal burden. He will use the funds to pay off his syndicate, and the bank will have a direct, undeniable claim against your Tahoe house. I did not cry. A year ago, maybe even a week ago, I might have collapsed onto the thick carpet of this office, sobbing uncontrollably over the shattered illusion of my perfect fiancé and the family I thought I was gaining. But growing up, bouncing between group homes and foster care had permanently burned the victim mentality completely out of my system. When someone corners you, you do not weep, you sharpen your teeth. The grief that had been threatening to drown me instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated, and terrifyingly clear rage. Spencer did not just want a wealthy wife to boost his ego, he wanted a host to drain dry. He had swapped the prenuptial agreement to steal half of my user experience agency, and he had forged my signature to steal the equity of my only true sanctuary in the mountains. I will contact the fraud department right now, Monica said, reaching for the heavy black receiver of her desk phone. We will cancel the application, report the forgery to the federal authorities, and have the police waiting for him at your rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. This ends today. Cancel it, I asked, placing my hand firmly over hers to stop her from picking up the phone. No, do not cancel a single thing. Monica looked at me like I had lost my mind. Haley, this is felony financial fraud. You cannot let this process. The risk to your portfolio is massive. I smiled, and I knew from the look in Monica's eyes that it was not a pleasant expression. I am not going to let it process. I am going to let it detonate. I stepped back, pacing the length of her office, the gears of a massive retaliation clicking into place. Freeze it on the back end. Use your legal authority to place a silent administrative hold on the collateral verification. Make sure it stays in a pending status all day tomorrow, and set it up so it declines for verified fraud exactly on Saturday morning. Let him think he has it. Let him walk into that luxury wedding venue believing he has won everything. Before Monica could argue with my incredibly dangerous strategy, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the tension in the room. I pulled it from my purse, fully expecting to see Spencer calling to spin more lies about how much he missed me. But the caller ID made me freeze. It was Jamal. He was my future African-American brother-in-law, married to Spencer's deeply entitled sister, Maddox. Jamal was a quiet, brilliant corporate accountant who usually kept his head down and strictly avoided the toxic drama of the Beverly and Spencer show. We rarely spoke outside of polite holiday greetings. I swiped to answer, lifting the phone to my ear. Hello. He did not bother with pleasantries. His voice was low, rushed, and filled with a breathless panic. Haley, are you alone? Jamal whispered into the phone, the sound of passing traffic echoing in the background. I need to tell you something before you ruin your life. I tapped the speakerphone icon and set the device flat on Monica's polished mahogany desk. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool wood. I am here, Jamal. I am sitting with my attorney, Monica. You are on speaker. Whatever you have to say it right now. A heavy, ragged sigh echoed through the phone speaker. I could hear the muffled, distant sound of passing traffic, and the rhythmic, anxious tapping of his fingers against a leather steering wheel. I am parked 3 blocks away from my own house. Jamal began, his voice barely above a murmur, vibrating with a mixture of fear and absolute exhaustion. I am hiding in my car because I cannot physically look at my wife right now. And I definitely cannot sit back and let you marry into this family without knowing the truth. Monica locked eyes with me, her pen hovering over a fresh yellow legal pad. The pieces of the financial puzzle were already slamming together in my mind with sickening precision. Spencer cornered me in my driveway late last night. Jamal continued, the disgust thick and heavy in his tone. He was shaking, sweating right through his designer shirt. He completely dropped the arrogant Golden Boy act and begged me to use my accounting firm's software to forge 3 months of inflated pay stubs for him. He needed them to satisfy a collateral verification requirement for a $400,000 line of credit. He admitted to me right there in the dark that he was pulling it against your Tahoe property. Why does he need that specific amount of cash so desperately? I asked, fighting to keep my voice utterly devoid of the rage boiling in my chest. Crypto Jamal spit out the word like a vile poison. He leveraged money he did not actually have into a highly volatile syndicate about 6 months ago. He thought he was a financial genius who was going to double his net worth before the wedding. Instead, the market crashed, and the syndicate called in the entire massive debt. These are not people who send polite collection letters to your mailbox, Haley. They promised to physically dismantle his life and his reputation if he did not wire the funds by this Saturday. He is using your hard-earned assets to save his own skin. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. And Maddox, I pressed, already knowing the rot ran deep through their entire family tree. What exactly does your wife know about this master plan? Everything, Jamal said, the heartbreak in his voice rapidly shifting into a hardened, bitter anger. Maddox is entirely in on the scam. I walked into our living room this morning before work and found her cheerfully packing her designer clothes into moving boxes. She used my credit card to buy the premium packing supplies. When I asked her what she was doing, she actually smiled at me. She told me Beverly had officially secured her new luxury housing. Beverly promised her that you were eagerly signing over your downtown loft to them as a wedding gift to welcome her into the family. Maddox has a premium moving truck scheduled for Sunday morning. They plan to take over your property the literal minute you leave for your honeymoon. Monica leaned closer to the phone, her lawyer instincts taking full control of the interrogation. Jamal, this is Monica, Haley's attorney. I need you to answer me very clearly. Did you forge those financial documents for Spencer? Absolutely not. Jamal fired back instantly, deeply insulted by the mere suggestion that he would compromise his morals. I told him I would rather lose my CPA license and burn my own firm to the ground than help him steal from a woman who actually worked for everything she has. I refused to touch the paperwork. I told him to get off my property. But Spencer just laughed in my face. He said he had an inside guy at the bank who could push the approval through with minimal verification anyway. He just needed the digital application filed to get the ball rolling. Haley, you need to cancel this wedding immediately. You need to run as far away from these parasites as you possibly can. The silence in the office was absolute. I looked at the phone, then at Monica, who was already furiously drafting the fraud dispute forms on her notepad. Jamal was the only decent human being in that entire genetic line. He was a man who had spent 5 long years being treated like a glorified servant by Beverly, relentlessly mocked for his honest, steady career by Spencer, and entirely financially drained by Maddox's endless shopping addictions. He was an outsider just like me. I leaned down, bringing my mouth close to the microphone of the phone. I am not running anywhere, Jamal. Running implies they have the power to chase me. I prefer to stand my exact ground and watch them burn. I heard him shift uncomfortably in his car seat. Haley, you do not understand what Beverly is capable of. She has spent her entire life spinning false narratives to protect her kids. If you just walk away quietly, you can save your business and your properties. If you fight her, she will tell everyone in high society that you are unstable and crazy. I am not walking away quietly, I replied, the icy calm returning to my voice, sharper and more lethal than before. And frankly, neither are you. Let me ask you a very direct question, Jamal. Are you tired of being their doormat? A long, pregnant pause stretched across the cellular connection. When Jamal finally spoke, the exhaustion of 1,000 condescending family dinners and endless financial bailouts weighed heavy on every single syllable. I have been speaking to a divorce lawyer for a month. He confessed the relief of finally saying the words out loud, evident in his heavy breath. I have the papers drafted and ready to file. I am just trying to figure out how to serve Maddox without Beverly turning the entire city against my accounting practice. They fight Dirty Haley. I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that made Monica raise an eyebrow from across the desk. The enemy of my enemy was not just my friend, he was my co-star. Good, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute undeniable authority. Keep those divorce papers very close to your chest. Wear your absolute best suit to the rehearsal dinner tonight, Jamal. We have a massive show to put on, and I promise you, by the time the curtain drops, Beverly will not have the social capital left to ruin anyone. I ended the call with Jamal and placed my phone flat on the polished mahogany desk. The silence in the office was thick, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning unit. Monica stared at me, her pen suspended over her legal pad. We both understood the sheer magnitude of the financial and social sabotage Spencer and his family had orchestrated. The initial shock had completely burned off, leaving behind a cold, hyper-focused clarity. My fiancé was not just a liar. He was a desperate man backed into a corner by dangerous people, and he was using my life's work as a shield. We need to outline every single legal landmine he planted, I instructed, pulling my chair closer to her dual monitors. I want a complete barricade around my personal assets, my business accounts, and my real estate portfolio. And I want it done before 5 o'clock tonight. Monica snapped back into high gear. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, opening fresh legal templates and secure banking portals. First, we draft an immediate revocation of the prenuptial agreement, she stated, her eyes scanning the dense text on her screen. We will cite egregious fraud, material misrepresentation, and the unauthorized swapping of signature pages. I am pulling the IP tracking logs from his office server right now. The data shows the exact time the fake document was uploaded from his terminal. This prenup is completely dead on arrival. No judge in this state will ever uphold a contract secured through active forgery. Do it. I agreed, watching the revocation document take shape on her monitor. And we need to compile a massive digital dossier. I want everything organized into one single undeniable file. Get the bank records showing the pending home equity application. Pull the digital signature analysis proving the forgery. Gather every shred of evidence regarding his $400,000 crypto debt and the syndicate threats Jamal just exposed. I want a complete financial autopsy of Spencer's entire life. We need to document every cent he owes and every illegal step he took to try and steal my money to cover it. Monica nodded rapidly, pulling files from the banking portal and compiling them into a secure encrypted folder. I am submitting the fraud alert to the Federal Banking Commission immediately, she said. His buddy at the bank, who intentionally bypassed the standard identity checks, is going to face a severe federal audit by Monday morning. I am putting a hard administrative freeze on the Tahoe property. The loan application will remain in a pending status all day tomorrow, and it will automatically trigger a hard decline for verified fraud exactly on Saturday morning. She paused, letting her hands rest on the keyboard. She looked up from her monitors, her expression shifting from fierce legal advocate to genuine concern. Haley, you have everything you need right here to walk away clean. We can freeze the accounts, submit the fraud claims to the authorities, and you can just cancel the wedding right now. You can send out a mass email to the guests, block his number, and let the police handle him and his banking accomplice. It will save you a massive headache and keep you far away from the fallout. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, slowly shaking my head. If I cancel the wedding right now, Beverly completely controls the fallout. She will immediately spin the narrative to her country club friends and the local press. She will tell all of high society that I am just an unstable, ungrateful orphan who got cold feet and left her wonderful son at the altar. She will paint him as a tragic victim, and me as a classless fraud who could not handle marrying into a prominent family. She will use my background against me just like she always does behind closed doors. You have the financial evidence to prove otherwise, Monica countered, tapping the encrypted folder on her screen. Evidence is just paper until it is presented to a jury, and wealthy gossip moves far faster than litigation, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. I do not just want to leave him, Monica. I want to incinerate his entire facade. I want every single person in his elite circle to see exactly who he is, and I want them to see it live. I need them to witness the exact moment his mask burns away, leaving Beverly with absolutely zero social capital to launch a counterattack. I want Maddox to realize she is never stepping foot in my downtown loft. I want Spencer to face his creditors without a single dime of my money. Monica let out a slow breath, a small impressed smile touching the corners of her mouth. You are going to let them hang themselves in front of an audience. I am going to hand them the rope, I corrected. I pulled my smartphone back across the desk and opened my primary corporate banking application. The dashboard loaded, displaying my business accounts and the linked cards. I navigated to the supplementary credit card management tab. Spencer had practically begged for a card linked to my business account last month. He claimed he wanted to handle the final vendor deposits for the wedding without constantly bothering me for bank transfers. I had given him a heavy metallic supplementary card with a massive spending limit, treating him like an equal and trusted partner. He had specifically insisted on using that exact card to pay for tonight's lavish rehearsal dinner at the city's most exclusive, ultra-expensive steakhouse. He wanted to play the wealthy, generous host in front of 50 high society guests, footing the massive bill with my money, while simultaneously mocking my lack of pedigree behind my back. He was going to order top-shelf liquor and imported steaks, secure in the knowledge that the orphan was paying for his elevated lifestyle. I tapped on the card settings. The current spending limit was set to $50,000. I hit the edit button, deleted the zeros, and typed a new number. I hit save. A green confirmation banner flashed across the top of my screen, verifying the update. I smiled, placing the phone back in my purse. I had just changed his supplementary card spending limit to exactly $5. Tonight, Spencer was going to learn what it actually felt like to have nothing. I locked my phone screen and dropped it into my designer clutch. The quiet click of the clasp echoed like a vault sealing shut. I stood up from Monica's desk, smoothing the sharp lines of my tailored blazer. I had walked into this legal firm as a woman blinded by the illusion of love, desperate to protect the family I thought I was finally gaining. I was walking out as an executioner. 2 hours later, I pulled up to the valet stand of the Wellington, the city's most fiercely exclusive steakhouse. It was the kind of establishment that did not list prices on the menu, where the wait list for a standard Tuesday night stretched 6 months deep. Spencer had insisted on booking their grand private dining room for the rehearsal dinner. He claimed his family's social standing demanded a certain level of prestige. I now knew his family's social standing was a hollow facade, entirely funded by predatory debt, and he fully intended to use my corporate account to pay the astronomical bill tonight. I stepped out of my car, handing the keys to the valet. I had chosen my outfit with absolute surgical precision. An ivory silk midi dress that hugged my frame flawlessly, paired with stiletto heels that clicked against the marble entryway like a metronome ticking down to a detonation. I looked breathtaking. I looked powerful. I looked exactly like the wealthy, blissfully ignorant bride they all assumed they were swindling. The heavy oak doors to the private dining room swung open, revealing a scene of staggering, unearned opulence. 50 of Beverly's carefully curated high society guests filled the expansive room. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated seamlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and Wagyu beef tartare. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low buzzing hum of affluent chatter. I paused at the threshold, taking it all in. This entire room was a monument to their entitlement. Spencer spotted me immediately. He broke away from a group of silver-haired executives, his perfect camera-ready smile plastered across his face. He navigated the crowd with that effortless charm that had originally completely fooled me. He reached me, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me flush against his chest. "You look absolutely spectacular," he murmured, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against my neck. His breath was warm, carrying the distinct scent of a $200 glass of scotch. "I have missed you all day. I took care of all the final vendor confirmations, just like I promised. You do not have to worry about a single financial detail tonight, my love. I want you to just relax and enjoy our party. I am handling everything." I forced a radiant, loving smile onto my face, looking up into the lying eyes of the man who had forged my signature just hours prior. "Thank you, Spencer," I purred, my voice dripping with manufactured adoration. "You have no idea how much I appreciate you taking charge of the spending tonight." He kissed my forehead, entirely oblivious to the fact that his platinum supplementary card was currently carrying a hard limit of $5 American. He turned back to the crowd, raising his glass to order another round of premium imported champagne for his friends. I watched him go, feeling a dark, twisted thrill coursing through my veins. I moved through the room, playing my part flawlessly. I accepted the fake hugs, the hollow compliments, and the thinly veiled condescension from Beverly's country club friends. I smiled until my jaw ached, nodding along as they made passive-aggressive remarks about how lucky a self-made girl like me was to marry into such established lineage. I navigated the treacherous waters of their social hierarchy, waiting for the inevitable approach of the matriarch herself. I found a momentary reprieve near the back of the room, standing beside a massive, intricately carved ice sculpture of two interlocking swans. The cold air radiating from the frozen display felt grounding. Right on cue, Beverly materialized beside me. She wore an emerald green gown that reeked of desperate pretension, holding a crystal flute of champagne with an impossibly tight grip. She did not bother to greet me. She simply stepped into my personal space, her eyes scanning my ivory dress with clear, unfiltered disdain. "Make sure you smile tonight, Haley," Beverly stated, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper that barely carried over the ambient noise of the party. "Spencer is doing you a massive favor, marrying someone with no family pedigree. You bring nothing to this table but a messy background and a loud career. Do try to act like you belong here. We cannot have his colleagues thinking he's settled for charity." I turned to face my future mother-in-law. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I lifted my own glass of sparkling water, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact. I tapped the rim of my glass against the edge of her crystal flute. The sharp, high-pitched clink sliced through the immediate space between us. "Oh, I will give everyone a performance they will never forget, Beverly," I replied, my tone eerily calm, smooth as glass. "I guarantee you by the end of this evening, no one in this room will ever question exactly what I bring to the table." Beverly frowned, her meticulously Botoxed forehead twitching as she tried to decipher the absolute lack of fear in my response. Before she could formulate a sharp retort, a loud, shrill voice cut through the elegant murmur of the dining room. I turned my head. Maddox was sauntering toward a group of Beverly's most prominent friends near the private bar. She was wearing a violently expensive sequined designer dress that I knew for an absolute fact she had bought on a credit card she could not pay off. She held a fresh cocktail in the air, ensuring she had the undivided attention of the women surrounding her. "Oh, my husband and I are moving into a new luxury loft next week," Maddox announced loudly, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. "It has panoramic views of the entire downtown skyline. My little brother is so generous." She threw her head back, laughing a sharp, entitled laugh, already mentally decorating a multi-million-dollar property she planned to steal from me while I was away on my honeymoon. I let my eyes drift just over Maddox's shoulder. Jamal was standing a few feet behind his wife. He was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, looking completely out of place among the superficial posturing of his in-laws. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He was not smiling. Jamal slowly lifted his head. He looked straight through the crowd, bypassing his wife, bypassing Beverly, and locked eyes directly with me. He gave a slow, deliberate, and deeply disgusted shake of his head. I stared at Monica, the words ringing in my ears like a foreign language. A home equity line of credit. On my Tahoe lake house, I practically climbed over her desk to look at the monitor. I have not authorized any loan, I stated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. I own that property completely outright. I paid for it in cash 3 years ago. I have not spoken to a loan officer in over 6 months. Why would I ever leverage my own safe haven? Monica's fingers flew across her mechanical keyboard, the rapid clicking echoing in the tense silence of the room. She bypassed the standard client dashboard and logged directly into the secure banking portal she used to monitor my corporate and personal asset health. The screen refreshed, pulling up a master ledger of pending transactions. There it was, a blinding, undeniable line item sitting right in the approval queue. $400,000. The exact amount of Spencer's underground crypto debt. The exact amount he had just bragged about wiping clean while sipping wine in his mother's kitchen. My chest tightened so severely I felt my ribs might crack, but I forced oxygen deep into my lungs. The loan application had been filed digitally just 3 hours ago, right around the time Spencer told me he was stuck in back-to-back client meetings. The status indicator blinked in bright orange letters pending final verification. Open the attached application file, I commanded, leaning so close to the monitor I could see the pixels. Monica clicked the PDF icon, and a massive document filled the screen. We scrolled straight past the dense terms and conditions, stopping dead at the bottom of page 10. Staring back at me was my own signature. It was a digital stamp, perfectly mimicking the stylized cursive I used for all my major business contracts. But it was a complete forgery. I traced my finger over the cold glass of the monitor. Monica hovered her mouse over the digital footprint tracking. The timestamp on the IP address originated directly from Spencer's downtown insurance brokerage firm. How is this even remotely possible without my physical identification or a notary present? I demanded the reality of his deep structural deception, making my blood run completely cold. He is not just a liar, he is a financial predator. Monica leaned back in her heavy leather chair, crossing her arms as her brilliant legal mind dissected the crime in real time. He is using his position as an insurance broker to bypass the usual identity checks with a buddy at the bank. Monica stated, her tone laced with absolute professional disgust. He handles high net worth insurance policies all the time. He knows exactly how the underwriters operate, what loopholes exist in the digital verification process, and he clearly has an inside contact pushing this massive application through the approval queue without flagging your primary phone number for authorization. She turned her chair to face me directly, grabbing my hand with a firm, grounding grip. Haley, listen to me very carefully. If you say I do on Saturday, this debt becomes a marital liability. The moment that marriage certificate is filed with the county clerk, his $400,000 fraudulent loan becomes your mutual legal burden. He will use the funds to pay off his syndicate, and the bank will have a direct, undeniable claim against your Tahoe house. I did not cry. A year ago, maybe even a week ago, I might have collapsed onto the thick carpet of this office, sobbing uncontrollably over the shattered illusion of my perfect fiancé and the family I thought I was gaining. But growing up bouncing between group homes and foster care had permanently burned the victim mentality completely out of my system. When someone corners you, you do not weep. You sharpen your teeth. The grief that had been threatening to drown me instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated, and terrifyingly clear rage. Spencer did not just want a wealthy wife to boost his ego. He wanted a host to drain dry. He had swapped the prenuptial agreement to steal half of my user experience agency, and he had forged my signature to steal the equity of my only true sanctuary in the mountains. I will contact the fraud department right now, Monica said, reaching for the heavy black receiver of her desk phone. We will cancel the application, report the forgery to the federal authorities, and have the police waiting for him at your rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. This ends today. Cancel it, I asked, placing my hand firmly over hers to stop her from picking up the phone. No. Freeze it so it declines exactly on Saturday morning. Let him think he has it. Monica looked at me like I had lost my mind. Haley, this is felony financial fraud. You cannot let this process. The risk to your portfolio is massive. I smiled, and I knew from the look in Monica's eyes that it was not a pleasant expression. I am not going to let it process. I am going to let it detonate. I stepped back, pacing the length of her office, the gears of a massive retaliation clicking into place. Use your legal authority to place a silent administrative hold on the collateral verification. Make sure it stays in a pending status all day tomorrow. Let him walk into that luxury wedding venue believing he has won everything. I want him standing at the altar when he realizes he has absolutely nothing. Before Monica could argue with my incredibly dangerous strategy, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the tension in the room. I pulled it from my purse, fully expecting to see Spencer calling to spin more lies about how much he missed me. But the caller ID made me freeze. It was Jamal, her African-American brother-in-law, a quiet, brilliant accountant who usually avoids family drama. He was married to Spencer's deeply entitled sister Maddox, and he kept his head down, strictly avoiding the toxic drama of the Beverly and Spencer show. We rarely spoke outside of polite holiday greetings. I swiped to answer, lifting the phone to my ear. Hello? He did not bother with pleasantries. His voice was low, rushed, and filled with a breathless panic. Haley, are you alone? He whispers into the phone, the sound of passing traffic echoing in the background. I need to tell you something before you ruin your life. Jamal sat back down smoothly, his face a mask of absolute calm. Underneath the heavy white linen tablecloth, the sharp thud of a leather shoe connecting with a shin echoed softly. Spencer had viciously kicked his brother-in-law, his perfect smile straining at the edges. Beverly's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. The heavy layers of expensive setting powder could not hide the sheer fury radiating from her skin. She opened her mouth, inhaling sharply to issue a swift correction, to wrestle the narrative back to her son's supposed charity. But the damage was already irreparably done. A low murmur rippled through the private dining room. The 50 high society guests were no longer looking at me with thinly veiled pity. They were assessing me. I was no longer the tragic, unpedigreed orphan they were graciously tolerating. I was a self-made tech CEO. The sudden shift in the room's energy was entirely too much for Maddox to handle. Her fragile ego required constant feeding, and Jamal had just starved her in front of the city's elite. She shot her husband a look of pure, unadulterated venom, her manicured nails digging into the pristine tablecloth. Desperate to reclaim her perceived dominance and re-establish the hierarchy, Maddox abruptly stood up. The sequins on her designer dress, a dress I knew for a fact was maxing out a high-interest credit card, caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. She bypassed her mother entirely and made a direct, aggressive beeline for a woman sitting 2 tables away. Elaine was one of the city's most exclusive interior designers, a woman whose clientele strictly included the top 1%. Maddox did not bother lowering her voice. She wanted everyone to hear her. She needed an audience for her delusion. Elaine, darling, Maddox projected, her shrill voice echoing off the dark mahogany paneling. I am so glad you could make it tonight. I actually need to book a premium consultation with your firm for early next week. Elaine looked up, pausing with her wineglass halfway to her mouth, clearly caught off guard by the sudden volume. She managed a polite, tight, professional smile. Maddox pressed on, turning her body slightly, so the entire room, especially me, could witness her grand display of stolen wealth. Oh, my husband and I are moving into a new luxury loft next week, Maddox announced loudly to her friends, her voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. My little brother is so generous. It has decent bones, but the finishes are incredibly cheap. I want to gut the entire living space before we officially settle in. Money is absolutely no object. Jamal, standing quietly a few feet behind her chair, did not intervene. He simply lifted his head, met my eyes across the room, and gave a slow, disgusted shake of his head. He was completely done. Maddox sauntered over to my table, her posture radiating entitled triumph. She leaned down, resting her hands on the back of my chair, like a predator playing with its food. She leaned in close, ensuring her voice carried to the surrounding tables. "Make sure you leave the Smart Home Hub passwords on the kitchen counter for me on Sunday," she commanded, her tone laced with a sickening sweetness. "I'm ripping out those cheap hardwood floors you installed. They simply do not align with my vision, and frankly, I cannot stand the thought of walking on something so aggressively basic." I did not glare. I did not point out that those cheap floors were imported, custom-milled Brazilian oak that cost more than her entire annual salary. I slowly set down my heavy crystal water glass, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. I looked up at Maddox and smiled. It was a wide, radiantly warm expression, the perfect picture of a blissful bride. "Oh, Maddox," I replied, my voice smooth, melodic, and perfectly projected, so every eager eavesdropper could hear clearly. "I wouldn't dream of letting you live on those floors. I've already made special arrangements for your housing." Maddox blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my complete lack of resistance. She searched my face for a trace of sarcasm, but found only serene compliance. Assuming she had won, she flipped her hair over her shoulder and strutted back to her seat, her ego temporarily satisfied. The dinner service progressed with flawless precision. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated seamlessly, clearing the plates of Wagyu beef tartare and seared imported ribeye. Spencer played his part flawlessly, ordering 3 additional bottles of Camus for his groomsmen, laughing loudly, and playing the role of the generous, wealthy host. He was riding the high of his own deception, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. He thought his forged loan application was sitting safely in the bank's approval queue. He thought he had successfully secured my assets to pay off his dangerous crypto syndicate. As the final dessert plates, gold leaf, dark chocolate torts were cleared away, the atmosphere in the private room mellowed into a comfortable, wealthy hum. The maitre d' glided across the room, moving with practiced discretion. He carried a sleek black leather folder. He bypassed the groomsmen, stepped neatly around Beverly, and stopped exactly at Spencer's right shoulder. The bill for the rehearsal dinner: $8,500. Spencer didn't even blink. He didn't check the itemized receipt or review the gratuity. With a sharp, arrogant smirk directed at his friends, he reached into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out the heavy metallic supplementary credit card. The exact card that was linked directly to my primary business account. The card he fully intended to use to fund his high society performance with my hard-earned money. He dropped the metal card onto the leather tray with a loud, satisfying clink, handing it back to the maitre d' without a second thought. The transition from the cold, sterile reality of Monica's legal office to the warm, suffocating opulence of the city's most exclusive steakhouse took exactly 2 hours. I handed the keys of my car to the valet standing beneath the glowing marquee of the Wellington. The crisp evening air bit at my bare shoulders, but I barely felt it. I had spent the entire drive completely compartmentalizing my rage, locking it away behind a flawless, impenetrable exterior. Tonight was not about anger. Tonight was about theater. I stepped through the heavy brass doors and into the private dining wing, immediately engulfed by the low, buzzing hum of affluent chatter and the soft, rhythmic bass line of a live jazz trio. The room was a staggering display of unearned extravagance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 50 of Beverly's carefully curated high society guests. Men in bespoke suits and women in heavy, suffocating designer gowns milled about the mahogany-paneled room, clutching flutes of vintage champagne and picking at silver trays of beluga caviar. I had chosen my outfit with absolute surgical precision. I wore a floor-length ivory silk slip dress that hugged my frame, flawlessly paired with emerald-cut diamond earrings that caught the chandelier light with every movement. I looked breathtaking. I looked radiant. I looked exactly like the blissful, deeply ignorant bride they all assumed I was. Spencer spotted me the absolute second I crossed the threshold. He broke away from a cluster of silver-haired executives, his perfect camera-ready smile plastered across his face. He navigated the crowded room with the effortless predatory charm that had originally fooled me, slipping his arm around my waist and pulling me flush against his chest. "You look breathtaking, Haley," he murmured, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against my cheek. His breath was warm, carrying the distinct, expensive scent of top-shelf bourbon. "I have been waiting for you all evening. I took care of the final vendor deposits today, just like I promised. You don't have to worry about a single financial detail tonight, my love. Just relax and play the beautiful bride. I am handling absolutely everything." I looked up into the lying eyes of the man who had forged my signature just hours prior, forcing a radiant, loving smile onto my face. I played the part of the submissive, adoring partner perfectly. "Thank you, Spencer." I purred, my voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "You have no idea how much I appreciate you taking charge tonight." He kissed my forehead, entirely oblivious to the fact that his platinum supplementary card was currently carrying a hard limit of $5 American, and turned back to flag down a waiter for another round of drinks. I watched him go, a dark, twisted thrill coursing through my veins. I spent the next 40 minutes navigating the treacherous waters of their social hierarchy. I accepted the fake hugs, the hollow congratulations, and the thinly veiled condescension from Beverly's country club friends. I smiled until my cheekbones ached, nodding along politely as they made passive-aggressive remarks about how lucky a self-made girl like me was to marry into such established generational lineage. I endured their pitying looks and backhanded compliments with absolute grace, secure in the knowledge that their entire social standing was a hollow facade funded by predatory debt and my own corporate accounts. Seeking a momentary reprieve from the suffocating pretense, I retreated to the back of the dining room. I positioned myself near a massive, intricately carved ice sculpture of two interlocking swans that dominated the dessert buffet. The cold air radiating from the frozen display felt grounding against the heat of the crowded room. Right on cue, Beverly materialized from the crowd. She wore a stiff, heavily beaded emerald green gown that reeked of desperate pretension, holding a crystal flute of champagne with an impossibly tight grip. She did not bother with pleasantries or a traditional greeting. She simply stepped directly into my personal space, her sharp eyes scanning my ivory dress with clear, unfiltered disdain. Beverly cornered me against the edge of the buffet table, leaning in so her voice would not carry over the jazz music. "Make sure you smile tonight, Haley," she instructed, her tone harsh and dripping with venom. "Spencer is doing you a massive favor marrying someone with no family pedigree. Do try to act like you belong here. We cannot have his colleagues thinking he settled for charity." I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze or shrink away from her malice. I simply lifted my own glass of sparkling water, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with the woman who had orchestrated the theft of my life's work. I tapped the rim of my glass against her crystal flute. The sharp, high-pitched clink sliced through the immediate space between us. "Oh, I'll give everyone a performance they'll never forget, Beverly," I replied, my voice smooth, melodic, and completely devoid of fear. Beverly frowned, her meticulously Botoxed forehead twitching as she tried to decipher the absolute lack of intimidation in my response. Before she could formulate a sharp retort to put me back in my place, a loud, shrill voice cut through the elegant murmur of the dining room. I turned my head toward the center of the room. Maddox was sauntering toward a group of Beverly's most prominent friends near the private bar. She was wearing a violently expensive sequined designer dress that I knew for an absolute fact she had bought on a high-interest credit card she could not afford to pay off. She held a fresh cocktail high in the air, ensuring she had the undivided attention of the wealthy women surrounding her. "Oh, my husband and I are moving into a new luxury loft next week," Maddox announced loudly, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. "My little brother is so generous." She threw her head back, laughing, a sharp, entitled laugh, already mentally decorating a multi-million-dollar downtown property she planned to inhabit while I was away on my honeymoon. I let my eyes drift just over Maddox's shoulder. Jamal was standing a few feet behind his wife. He was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, looking completely out of place and deeply exhausted among the superficial posturing of his in-laws. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He was not smiling, and he was not participating in the charade. Jamal slowly lifted his head. He looked straight through the crowd, bypassing his boasting wife and his glaring mother-in-law, and locked eyes directly with me. He gave a slow, deliberate, and deeply disgusted shake of his head. The maitre d' bowed his head slightly, taking the leather folder with a practiced, elegant grace, and glided away toward the discreet billing station near the private bar. Spencer immediately returned to his conversation with the groomsman, loudly boasting about an upcoming golf trip to Pebble Beach he had supposedly already booked. I stood quietly holding my glass of sparkling water, counting the seconds in my head, feeling the adrenaline hum beneath my skin. Exactly 2 minutes later, the maitre d' reappeared. His professional composure was fully intact, but his pace was notably quicker, his steps sharp and purposeful. He bypassed the waiters and stepped directly up to Spencer, interrupting a loud joke about amateur real estate investors. The maitre d' leaned in close to Spencer's ear and whispered a few very brief words. I watched the exact moment the blood completely drained from Spencer's face. His arrogant, camera-ready smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a tight, panicked grimace. He snatched the leather folder back from the maitre d', pulling out the heavy metallic card. He marched directly over to the billing station, demanding they run the transaction again. I followed at a leisurely pace, keeping a polite distance, watching him aggressively swipe the magnetic strip through the terminal himself. The screen flashed a harsh red light. Declined. He shoved the chip in again, his hand shaking. Declined. He frantically punched in a PIN code, trying to force a cash advance. Declined. Spencer spun around, his eyes wild and scanning the room until they locked onto me. He grabbed my forearm, his grip bruisingly tight, and yanked me out of the main dining room into a quiet, heavily carpeted corridor leading to the restrooms. Sweat was beading rapidly on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He looked completely unhinged. Haley, the banking system is glitching, he hissed, his voice vibrating with barely suppressed panic. Give me your primary black card, quickly, before people notice what is happening. Just hand it over so I can clear this up and we can call the bank tomorrow to fix the error. I looked at him with dead calm eyes. I slowly peeled his fingers off my arm, stepping back to create a distinct physical barrier between us. I did not bring it, babe, I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. You explicitly said your family was hosting tonight, remember? You demanded to pay. A wealthy, high-society family like yours would not possibly need an orphan's money to pay for dinner. His jaw dropped. The realization that he had absolutely no safety net hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to formulate a lie, to beg for a direct bank transfer, but before he could speak, the heavy oak doors to the corridor swung open. The restaurant manager stepped through, followed closely by the maitre d'. The manager did not lower his voice to a discreet whisper. He spoke with the clear, carrying tone of a man who dealt with wealthy fraudsters on a regular basis. Sir, do you have another form of payment? The manager asked, projecting his words so clearly that the guests nearest the corridor doors suddenly stopped talking and turned around. Because this card is locked, and the total is $8,500. If you cannot settle this tab right now, I will have to call the authorities. The sudden silence at the back of the dining room was deafening. Heads turned. Conversations halted. Beverly, sensing a major disturbance in her perfectly choreographed social event, pushed her way through the crowd of suddenly silent guests. She marched into the corridor, her emerald gown swishing furiously. She glared at me immediately, assuming I was the source of the problem. What on earth is going on here? Beverly demanded, her voice shrill and accusatory. Haley, why are you embarrassing my son in front of my friends? Stop causing a scene and get back to your table immediately. I smiled. It was the warmest, most genuine smile I had worn all evening. I turned my body slightly so the growing crowd of wealthy onlookers crowding the doorway could hear every single word I said. I am so sorry, Beverly, I announced, projecting my voice beautifully down the hall. Spencer's credit card just declined for the dinner bill. I did not bring my wallet since Spencer insisted your family was fully hosting us tonight. Surely you can cover the $8,500. You always talk about your extensive wealth and generosity. Beverly froze. The heavy layer of setting powder and Botox on her face could not hide the sheer absolute terror that flashed across her features. She looked at Spencer, who was staring at the floor, sweating through his custom-tailored shirt. She looked at the manager, who was holding the declined receipt like a weapon. Then she looked at the 50 high society guests, who were now actively leaning in, whispering behind their hands, watching the prominent Beverly face the harsh reality of an unpaid restaurant tab. She did not have $8,500. I knew from Monica's financial autopsy that Beverly's checking accounts were completely overdrawn. Her credit cards were entirely maxed out, just keeping up appearances. She was completely trapped. Gritting her teeth, Beverly tried desperately to salvage her pride. Her hands shook violently as she reached for her left wrist. She unclasped the heavy gold watch she wore to every single social event. It was her prized possession, a piece she constantly bragged was a rare family heirloom passed down through generations of extreme wealth. She thrust the watch into the manager's chest. "Take this as collateral," Beverly commanded, trying to inject her usual haughty authority into her shaking voice. "It is a vintage Rolex. It is worth more than this entire restaurant. Keep it in your safe while my son figures out a simple wire transfer glitch." The manager caught the watch, his expression highly skeptical. He did not simply nod and walk away to secure the item. The Wellington catered to billionaires and royalty. They did not accept random jewelry as payment without immediate verification. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small jeweler's loupe, the exact kind he used to inspect high-end items left by eccentric clients. He held the gold watch up to the bright corridor light, screwing the loupe into his eye. The corridor was so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in the glasses on the nearby tables. The manager lowered the watch. He pulled the loupe from his eye and looked directly at Beverly, his face a mask of professional pity. "Ma'am," he stated, his voice echoing perfectly into the silent dining room. "This is a replica, a very cheap one." The guests erupted into a loud, unified wave of shocked whispers. The entire facade shattered completely. Beverly let out a strangled, humiliating sob, covered her red face with her hands, and fled down the corridor toward the restroom in tears. The morning sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury penthouse suite, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported marble floors. It was Saturday, my wedding day. The air inside the room was heavy with the scent of white roses and expensive hairspray. I sat perfectly still in a velvet chair while two women hovered around me. One was adjusting the intricate hand-stitched lace bodice of my custom $15,000 gown. The other, a highly sought-after makeup artist, was carefully brushing a light layer of setting powder across my cheekbones. The contrast between the serene, pristine atmosphere of the bridal suite and the absolute destruction I had unleashed the night before was highly satisfying. I looked at my reflection in the oversized vanity mirror. I did not look like a woman about to pledge her life to a man she loved. I looked like a woman preparing to execute a flawless, long-awaited demolition. The silk of the dress felt like armor. Every curl, every sweep of mascara was calculated. The heavy double doors of the suite suddenly burst open, hitting the wall with a loud, violent crack. The makeup artist jumped her brush, slipping slightly. Maddox marched into the room like she owned the entire building. She was wearing her designated bridesmaid dress, a shimmering, aggressive shade of champagne that she had undoubtedly demanded be altered to draw maximum attention to herself. Her face was flushed with absolute fury, her jaw tight and her eyes practically vibrating with rage. She completely ignored the stylists and stormed directly toward my chair, stopping just inches away from the train of my gown. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Maddox demanded, her voice shrill and echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "What exactly was that pathetic stunt you pulled last night?" I did not answer her. I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on my own reflection in the mirror, maintaining a perfectly blank, relaxed expression. I raised a single finger, signaling the makeup artist to continue her work. Maddox crossed her arms, her acrylic nails digging into her own skin. "My mother is currently locked in her hotel room, refusing to come out because you decided to stage some ridiculous financial glitch at the restaurant. You humiliated her in front of half the city. Beverly is a respected pillar of this community, and you made her look like a common beggar handing over her watch like that. The makeup artist nervously applied a sheer gloss to my lips, clearly terrified by the escalating tension. I remained completely silent, letting the makeup artist finish the final touches. The silence infuriated Maddox more than any insult could have. She craved engagement. She craved a fight so she could assert her perceived superiority. My absolute refusal to participate was driving her insane. "Are you deaf?" Maddox yelled, stepping even closer, completely disregarding my personal space. "You are absolutely lucky Spencer is still willing to marry you today. Do you understand that a man of his caliber does not have to put up with trashy, classless behavior from a woman with no family and no background? You should be down on your knees thanking God he is willing to give you his last name after you embarrassed his mother like that." I gently placed my hand over the makeup artist's wrist, silently dismissing her. The stylist nodded, quickly gathered her brushes and practically ran out of the suite, pulling the heavy doors shut behind her. The room was completely quiet now, save for the sound of Maddox's heavy, angry breathing. She stood over me, expecting me to cower, expecting me to apologize and beg for her family's forgiveness so the wedding could proceed. She thought she held all the power. She thought I was desperate for their validation. I slowly reached across the vanity and picked up my phone. The screen was dark. I tapped it once, ignoring Maddox entirely. I watched the lock screen illuminate. A single highly anticipated notification sat waiting for me. The automated fraud alert from my private corporate banking portal was glaringly clear. The text was concise, professional, and absolutely devastating. HELOC loan application for $400,000 denied due to verified signature forgery. Local authorities have been notified. I read the words 3 times, letting the profound weight of that single sentence settle into my bones. Spencer had actually gone through with it. In his arrogant, desperate delusion, he had submitted the home equity line of credit application, using my property, attaching a forged signature he believed would pass inspection. He thought he was outsmarting me. He thought he had successfully secured $400,000 of my hard-earned assets to pay off his dangerous crypto syndicate and fund his lavish fake lifestyle. Instead, he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him. The bank had not just flagged the transaction, they had verified the forgery and notified the police. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had locked permanently. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I locked my phone and placed it gently back onto the marble vanity. "Are you smiling?" Maddox shrieked, her voice reaching an unbearable pitch. "My brother is out there right now dealing with the fallout of your little stunt trying to manage the vendors, because your card mysteriously stopped working, and you sit here smiling. You are a psychopath." I stood up. The movement was slow, fluid, and incredibly deliberate. The heavy silk of my $15,000 gown cascaded around me, pooling flawlessly on the floor. I turned to face Maddox. I was significantly taller than her in my heels, and I used every inch of that height to look down on her. The fury in her eyes faltered for a fraction of a second as she met my gaze. She was looking for fierce submission or an apology. She found nothing but cold, predatory calculation. My reflection in the mirror beside her was icy and perfect. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, desperate energy. I simply looked at the woman who had tormented me for months, fully aware that her entire world was about to collapse. "Tell Spencer I am ready," I said. Maddox's jaw snapped shut, her previous bravado evaporating into the heavily perfumed air of the bridal suite. The absolute lack of fear in my eyes completely short-circuited her ability to argue. She turned on her heel, her champagne-colored dress swishing violently, and practically fled the room. I took one final look in the mirror, smoothing the flawless ivory silk over my hips. I picked up the sleek black wireless microphone from the vanity, turning it over in my hands. It was heavy, a tangible weight of the ruin I was about to rain down upon this family. In my other hand, I held a small, inconspicuous remote linked directly to the venue's master audio-visual board. I had tipped the head audio engineer $3,000 an hour ago to ensure absolutely no one could override my signal. The bank's fraud alert was the final definitive piece of evidence. Spencer was not just a liar. He was a desperate documented criminal. I stepped out of the suite and walked slowly down the long carpeted corridor leading to the grand ballroom. The muffled, elegant notes of a live string quartet drifted through the heavy oak double doors ahead of me. Two tuxedo-clad event coordinators stood at the ready, their hands resting on the brass handles. They gave me polite, confused looks as they noticed the absence of a floral bouquet, their eyes darting to the microphone in my grip. I gave them a curt single nod. The heavy door swung open. The grand ballroom was a staggering, suffocating display of stolen wealth. 250 guests sat in gilded Chiavari chairs, bathed in the warm ambient glow of thousands of floating candles and massive crystal chandeliers. Cascading arrangements of imported white orchids and hydrangeas covered every visible surface. It was the perfect stage for a perfect lie funded entirely by a man who had just tried to illegally leverage my property. As I crossed the threshold, the string quartet swelled into the traditional bridal chorus. The guests stood, their faces turning toward me with eager, polite smiles. Those smiles began to falter almost immediately. A low murmur rippled through the back rows, spreading forward like a localized tidal wave. The whispers ignited, carrying over the classical music. I was walking down the aisle completely alone, bypassing the traditional escort. My hands were not delicately clasped around a bouquet of imported peonies. I was holding a piece of audio equipment like a weapon. I kept my posture absolute and rigid. My chin was held high, my eyes locked dead ahead. I registered the shock on the faces of Spencer's high society colleagues. I saw Elaine, the exclusive interior designer Maddox had tried to loudly solicit the night before, lowering her program with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. I saw Jamal standing near the back, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the spectacle with quiet, grim satisfaction. Spencer stood at the end of the white silk runner, wearing a bespoke tuxedo paid for by my corporate account. His meticulously crafted camera-ready smile was straining violently at the edges. His eyes darted from my face to the microphone in my hand, a flicker of genuine terror finally penetrating his arrogant facade. He shifted his weight, shooting a desperate, confused look at the event coordinator standing off to the side, demanding silent answers that no one possessed. In the front row, Beverly practically vibrated with indignation. She was wearing a violently expensive sapphire gown, leaning entirely out of her aisle seat. Her hands gripping the ceremony program so tightly, her knuckles were white. The utter humiliation of the fake Rolex incident from the rehearsal dinner was clearly still fresh, but her desperate need to control the narrative overrode her shame. Her eyes bored into me, burning with a toxic mixture of absolute hatred and mounting panic. She opened her mouth, leaning forward as if preparing to jump out of her seat, storm the aisle, and physically drag me out of the room to save her family's pristine reputation. I did not give her the chance. I stopped exactly 10 feet away from the altar. The physical distance was incredibly deliberate, a clear, insurmountable barrier between the life Spencer thought he was securing and the reality he was about to face. The string quartet, sensing the aggressively unscripted nature of the moment, began to play softer. The musicians looked at each other in panic, their notes stumbling into a confused, discordant hum before trailing off entirely. The whispers in the room escalated into a loud, frantic buzzing. 250 guests were actively shifting in their seats, exchanging wide-eyed glances, realizing they were witnessing a spectacular social execution. I raised the microphone to my lips. I know it's untraditional for the bride to speak before the vows. I announced, my voice echoing through the massive state-of-the-art speakers mounted in every corner of the grand ballroom. The sheer volume and absolute clarity of my voice sliced through the ambient noise, snapping the entire room into stunned, paralyzed silence. I looked directly into Spencer's panicked eyes, watching the last remnants of color completely drain from his face. He opened his mouth to interrupt, to spin a charming lie to play the concerned groom, but the microphone amplified my presence over anything he could possibly say. But I wanted to share a beautiful moment between my future husband and mother-in-law. I raised my left hand, displaying the small black remote for Spencer Beverly, and the entire front row to see. I held my thumb directly over the primary activation button, maintaining unbroken lethal eye contact with the man who had tried to steal my entire life. I pressed the button. The venue's sophisticated surround sound system crackled to life with a sharp electronic hiss, completely hijacking the string quartet's audio and locking out any other input. The sharp electronic hiss abruptly cut out, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that stretched taut across the grand ballroom. For one agonizing second, the 250 guests held their collective breath, their eyes darting from the speakers back to me, standing alone on the white silk runner. Then the crisp, digitally enhanced audio blared from the towering speakers mounted in every corner of the room. The voice was pristine. It was sharp, entitled, and completely unmistakable. Just make sure that little orphan signs the marriage certificate. Beverly's recorded drawl echoed off the vaulted ceilings, dripping with a visceral, predatory disdain that no one in her carefully curated social circle had ever heard before. In the front row, the real Beverly physically recoiled, her spine slamming against the back of her gilded Chiavari chair. Her jaw dropped open in a silent scream. Her UX agency and that gorgeous Tahoe lake house will finally be half yours. The recording continued, the sheer greed in her tone amplified to deafening levels. A collective synchronized gasp erupted from the crowd. It was a wave of pure, unfiltered shock. The wealthy executives, the country club socialites, the people who had looked at me with thinly veiled pity all evening were now staring at Beverly with undisguised horror. The woman sitting directly next to her literally shifted her chair inches away, desperate to distance herself from the sudden radioactive blast of public disgrace. Beverly raised shaking hands to her face, her meticulously maintained composure shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Before anyone could fully process the magnitude of the mother-in-law's confession, a second voice joined the audio track. The smooth, practiced baritone cut through the murmurs of the crowd, freezing everyone in place once again. Just 48 more hours of pretending I love her boring, rustic aesthetic. Spencer's voice flooded the ballroom. On the altar, the real Spencer swayed on his feet. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. His hands, previously clasped in a picture of poised confidence, fell limply to his sides. The arrogant groom playing the wealthy benefactor was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered, terrified animal. My 400K crypto debt is about to be wiped clean. The recorded. Spencer finished, letting out a harsh, arrogant laugh that sealed his absolute ruin. The ballroom exploded. The polite whispers instantly morphed into loud, chaotic exclamations of disgust. The facade of the generational Blackwell wealth was instantly vaporized, burned away by his own recorded admission. He was not a successful venture capitalist. He was a fraud drowning in catastrophic debt, desperately trying to manipulate his way into my bank accounts to save his own life. The high society guests who had praised him moments ago were now openly pointing their faces twisted in outrage. The illusion he had spent months building had been decimated in less than 30 seconds. Up at the altar, Spencer finally snapped. The sheer overwhelming reality of his public destruction bypassed his logical brain and triggered a surge of primal, unhinged panic. He looked at the sea of disgusted faces, looked at his mother, sobbing violently in the front row, and finally he looked at me. I stood perfectly still, my $15,000 ivory gown glowing under the chandeliers, my posture completely relaxed. I did not drop my gaze. I held the small black remote loosely in my left hand, maintaining absolute lethal eye contact with the man who had tried to steal everything I had built. Spencer let out a sound that was half roar and half sob. He abandoned his post at the altar, his polished black shoes sliding against the marble floor as he charged down the white silk runner directly toward me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure horror and violent rage, the veins bulging against the collar of his expensive tailored tuxedo. "Turn that off," Spencer screamed, his voice cracking as he pointed a shaking finger at the speakers, then at me. "It is a deepfake. She is crazy. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed, his hands reaching out to snatch the microphone and the remote from my grip. He wanted to silence the room. He wanted to force the truth back into the shadows and wrestle the narrative back under his control through sheer physical intimidation. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to step back to drop the equipment to cower in the face of his explosive anger, just as his mother and sister always did. I did not move a single inch. I stood my ground, my expression icy and perfectly resolute, watching him rush headlong into the final stage of his own trap. Spencer was just 5 feet away, his arm outstretched to grab my wrist, when the heavy mahogany doors on the right side of the ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. Monica stepped through the doorway, her tailored navy suit cutting a sharp contrast against the floral decorations. Her face was a portrait of absolute ruthless legal authority. She did not pause to take in the spectacle of the room. She moved with aggressive purpose, but she was not alone. 2 large uniformed police officers stepped through the doors immediately behind her. Their utility belts jingled sharply, the heavy thud of their boots on the marble floor, cutting through the chaotic shouts of the guests. They moved with practiced, tactical precision, stepping directly into the center of the aisle. They formed an impenetrable human wall, physically blocking Spencer's path to me just seconds before his hands could reach my dress. Spencer crashed into the wall of navy blue uniforms with a heavy, ungraceful thud. The sheer momentum of his blind rage sent him bouncing violently off the chest of the larger officer, causing him to stumble backward onto the white silk runner. His custom tuxedo jacket twisted awkwardly around his shoulders, ruining his carefully curated image. The officer did not flinch, merely dropping a heavy tactical hand onto his utility belt. It was a silent, but absolute warning that instantly paralyzed the groom. The grand ballroom erupted into complete, unrestrained chaos. 250 high society guests abandoned all pretense of decorum. Chairs scraped violently against the imported marble floor as people leaped to their feet in unison. Shouts of absolute disbelief and horrified gasps echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The illusion of a perfect, wealthy union had been violently ripped apart, leaving behind a raw, ugly spectacle that none of them could look away from. Cell phones were already being pulled out of purses and tuxedo pockets, the guests eager to document the catastrophic downfall of the Blackwell family. From the front row, Beverly finally snapped. The heavy layer of setting powder on her face could not hide the blotchy, furious red creeping up her neck. She scrambled out of her gilded chair, her heel catching on the hem of her violently expensive sapphire gown. She nearly face-planted onto the aisle, but caught herself flailing wildly as she fought to maintain her balance. "She set us up!" Beverly screamed, her voice shrill and echoing over the roar of the crowd. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her face contorted with pure panic and utter humiliation. "This is a setup. Arrest her immediately. She is a liar and a fraud. She altered that audio to ruin my son's wedding. Do you have any idea who we are? We are the Blackwells. Arrest her right now." The officers did not even look at her. They kept their eyes locked entirely on Spencer, who was currently hyperventilating. His eyes darted frantically around the room, scanning the walls and the exits, desperately searching for an escape route that did not exist. Monica bypassed the officers with the calm, lethal grace of a shark gliding through bloody water. Her navy suit was immaculate, her posture completely rigid. She walked directly up the altar steps and stood beside me, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying legal authority. She did not look at the screaming crowd. She did not look at Beverly throwing a tantrum on the floor. She looked only at the trembling, sweating man trapped at the bottom of the steps. I held out my hand. Monica smoothly took the wireless microphone from my grip. She did not tap the microphone to check the sound. She did not politely ask for quiet. She simply spoke, and the venue's massive surround sound system carried her commanding, deeply professional voice over the absolute chaos of the ballroom. "Spencer, you are not marrying my client today," Monica announced. The definitive surgical precision of her words cut through the screaming. The ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless hush. The guests leaned in, desperate to hear the executioner deliver the final fatal blow. You are, however, facing felony charges for forging her signature on a $400,000 federal loan document," Monica stated, her voice echoing with devastating clarity. The silence in the room became heavy and absolute. The guests stared at Spencer, their eyes wide with revulsion. Federal loan fraud. The words hung in the air like a permanent death sentence. The murmurs started again, this time harsher, filled with judgment and disgust. Spencer's knees buckled slightly. The arrogance that had defined his entire personality completely vanished, replaced by the pathetic, stuttering terror of a man who realized he was entirely out of options. He held his hands up, his palms facing the officers, in a desperate, frantic gesture of surrender. "I did not do that. I did not. We are getting married. It is marital property," Spencer stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. "It is our house. She is my wife. I had every right to secure our financial future. She is just crazy and trying to ruin my reputation." He was grasping at straws, repeating the same toxic delusions that had fueled his entitlement for the past year. He genuinely believed that a ring and a promise entitled him to strip me of everything I had worked my entire life to build. He thought his lies would shield him from the law. Monica did not argue with him. She did not raise her voice to match his panic. She simply reached into the inner pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of parchment. It was not a prop. It was the official, heavily stamped rejection letter from my private corporate bank, securely attached to a preliminary police report detailing the exact nature of the digital forgery. "This is not a negotiation," Spencer, Monica replied coldly, lowering the microphone. She stepped down from the altar and walked directly up to the lead police officer. With a crisp, definitive motion, she handed him the bank's fraud rejection letter. The officer took the document, his eyes scanning the verified forgery report and the attached legal affidavits. He nodded once, a sharp professional confirmation that the evidence was absolute and actionable. The officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed sharply in the quiet ballroom. "Sir, put your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, grabbing Spencer by the bicep and spinning him around roughly. Spencer let out a pathetic, strangled cry as his arms were wrenched behind him. The steel cuffs locked tightly around his wrists, trapping the cuffs of his expensive, custom-tailored shirt. He looked completely broken, staring at the floor, as the reality of a prison cell rapidly replaced his dreams of stealing my Tahoe lake house. Beverly let out a guttural, horrifying wail. She dropped to her knees on the white silk runner, entirely ruining her designer dress. She sobbed violently, clutching her face, finally realizing that the Blackwell name was permanently, publicly destroyed. There was no coming back from a televised arrest at the altar. From the front row, Maddox watched her brother get handcuffed. The shock that had been paralyzing her body finally shattered. She could not accept defeat. She could not accept that her wealthy, superior family was being systematically dismantled by a woman she viewed as completely beneath her. She leaped out of her chair, her face twisted in an ugly, desperate snarl. "You selfish witch," Maddox screamed, her voice raw and tearing through the silent ballroom. "You ruined our family." She spun around, scanning the front row until she locked eyes with Jamal, who was standing quietly near the aisle, his arms crossed, watching the arrest with total indifference. "Jamal, do something!" Maddox shrieked, pointing wildly at the officers securing her brother. "Defend my brother!" Spencer collided with the barricade of law enforcement, the breath rushing from his lungs in a hollow wheeze. The officers did not budge a single millimeter. One of them casually placed a hand on Spencer's chest, exerting just enough force to send him stumbling backward. He hit the polished marble floor, his expensive tailored trousers slipping awkwardly on the pristine surface. The frantic, wild energy that had propelled him down the aisle evaporated instantly, replaced by the crushing, suffocating reality of his own demise. He was trapped. The entire ballroom watched him cower, a pathetic, broken man who had just been publicly unmasked as a common criminal. From the front row, Maddox continued her unhinged screaming. Her voice was a grating, shrill siren that cut through the heavy silence of the shocked guests. She pointed a manicured finger at me, demanding someone fix the disaster unfolding before her eyes. When her commands yielded no results, she spun toward her husband. She expected blind loyalty. She expected Jamal to leverage his own considerable wealth and influence to rescue her fraudulent brother. Jamal did not rush forward. He did not mirror her frantic, desperate panic. Instead, Jamal slowly stood up from his front row seat. The movement was incredibly calm, completely devoid of urgency. He took a brief second to adjust the cuffs of his immaculately tailored charcoal suit, smoothing the lapels with the practiced grace of a man entirely at peace with his surroundings. The guests nearest to him instinctively leaned back, sensing a profound shift in the atmosphere. Jamal stepped into the center of the aisle. The heavy, frantic breathing of Spencer and the pathetic sobs of Beverly faded into the background as Jamal began a slow, measured walk toward the altar. The heels of his leather dress shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor, each step a deliberate, rhythmic strike. Maddox watched him approach, a triumphant, vicious sneer spreading across her face. She truly believed her savior was arriving. She stepped aside, expecting Jamal to bypass her, confront the police, and somehow magically invalidate the federal warrants. She expected him to wield his power as a weapon against me. Jamal walked right past his wife without offering her a single glance. He did not look at the whimpering Spencer on the floor. He did not look at the hyperventilating Beverly. He walked directly up to the altar, stopping right next to the wall of police officers. He looked at Monica, giving the sharp, ruthless attorney a brief nod of mutual respect. Monica did not hesitate. She handed the wireless microphone directly to Jamal. The 250 prominent guests held their breath. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, thick with the electric anticipation of a high society scandal reaching its absolute zenith. Jamal turned around. He looked down from the elevated altar, his gaze locking directly onto his wife. The triumphant smirk on Maddox's face vanished, replaced by a sudden sickening wave of uncertainty. She took a tiny step backward, her hands dropping to her sides. "I am not defending a fraud," Maddox, Jamal stated. His voice boomed through the venue's massive speakers, smooth, rich, and utterly devoid of warmth. The words hit the front row like a physical concussive wave. "I am not defending a man who lies, steals, and manipulates his way through life, just to maintain the illusion of relevance," Jamal continued, his tone remaining terrifyingly calm. "And just like I am not defending him, I am no longer defending a woman who has not worked a single day in her life and plotted to steal a self-made woman's home." Maddox physically recoiled, her jaw unhinged, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. She tried to speak, to formulate a defense, to scream another insult, but no sound came out. The air had been entirely sucked out of her lungs. Jamal reached a steady hand into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket. The entire room watched in spellbound silence as he pulled out a thick, meticulously folded legal document. The stark white paper contrasted sharply against his dark suit. He held it up for a fraction of a second, letting the weight of the moment settle over the audience before tossing it casually into the air. The heavy packet hit the marble floor right at Maddox's feet with a definitive hollow smack. "I filed for divorce at 8 a.m. this morning," Jamal announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "The paperwork is fully processed. My accounts are locked. My properties are secured. You aren't moving into a downtown loft. You're moving into reality." A collective gasp tore through the ballroom. Several guests actually covered their mouths, their eyes darting between the devastated bridesmaid and the stoic, unyielding husband. The Blackwell family's complete and total destruction was not just coming from external forces. It was coming from inside their own carefully fortified walls. Maddox stared down at the divorce papers on the floor, her body trembling violently. The realization that her endless supply of wealth, status, and unchecked entitlement had just been permanently severed hit her with paralyzing force. She looked back up at Jamal, her eyes pleading, searching for a hint of the submissive, accommodating man she had manipulated for years. Jamal did not offer an ounce of sympathy. Without breaking eye contact, he reached for his left hand. He grasped the heavy platinum wedding band on his ring finger. With one smooth, unbroken motion, he slid the ring over his knuckle. He held it suspended for a brief second before flicking his wrist. The heavy metal band hit the marble floor. It bounced once rolled in a tight circle, and finally came to a complete stop, resting directly on top of the fallen divorce papers. The metallic clatter echoed perfectly through the silent room, the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. Maddox let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the discarded ring. Jamal slowly turned his back on his soon-to-be ex-wife. He looked past the police officers, past the cowering groom, and fixed his eyes directly on me. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. He raised the microphone one last time. "It was an honor to help you gather the bank statements," Haley Jamal said, his voice echoing with quiet, profound respect. The crowd was absolutely stunned by the ultimate betrayal from inside the family. Jamal, the quiet, accommodating husband who had silently funded their lifestyle for years, had been the inside man. He had been secretly compiling the financial evidence, tracking the fraudulent transfers, and feeding the data directly to me to ensure Spencer's trap was perfectly executed. The Blackwells had not just been outsmarted, they had been completely outmaneuvered by the very people they considered beneath them. The echo of Jamal's words hung in the air, a devastating confirmation that the Blackwell family's fortress had been breached from the inside. Maddox let out a guttural sound of pure disbelief, staring at the discarded wedding band resting on top of her divorce papers. Her mind completely short-circuited. She had spent her entire life believing her family was untouchable, protected by an impenetrable wall of generational wealth and social superiority. Now the man who had silently funded her arrogance had handed the blueprints of their destruction directly to the enemy. The silence did not last. The larger of the two police officers took a decisive step forward, his heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. He gripped Spencer by the shoulder, hauling the groom up from his pathetic slump on the white silk runner. Spencer offered zero physical resistance. His body had gone entirely limp, his perfectly tailored tuxedo bunching awkwardly around his neck as the officer forcibly straightened him out. "Spencer, David Blackwell, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud and forgery." The officer stated, his voice a booming baritone that easily carried over the murmuring crowd. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda rights continued, each familiar sentence acting as a physical blow to Spencer's fragile ego. He shook his head wildly, a frantic, jerky motion. Tears began to spill from his eyes, carving wet tracks through the expensive setting powder the makeup artist had applied just an hour ago. His chest heaved with ragged, panicked breaths. He tried to twist away from the officer, throwing a desperate, pleading look toward me. "Haley, please!" Spencer cried out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You have to call them off. Tell them it is a mistake. I can explain everything. The crypto debt was just a temporary liquidity issue. It was a bad margin call. I was going to pay the $400,000 back as soon as the market rebounded. I swear to God." He lunged forward, his handcuffed wrists straining against the officer's iron grip. He tried to drop to his knees again, aiming to grab the hem of my $15,000 gown. "I love you, Haley," he sobbed, spit flying from his lips. "I really love you. We are supposed to be a team. You cannot let them do this to me." I took a single deliberate step backward, ensuring his grasping fingers met nothing but empty air. I looked down at the man I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with. There was no anger left in my system. There was no sorrow. There was only the cold, clinical satisfaction of watching a parasite finally get detached from its host. "You did not want a wife, Spencer," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the venue speakers for every single guest to hear. "You wanted an ATM. Unfortunately for you, this ATM bites back." A sharp gasp rippled through the front rows. Several guests nodded in grim approval, their cell phones held high to capture every frame of the groom's humiliation. Before Spencer could formulate another pathetic excuse, a violent blur of sapphire silk hurled itself at the altar. Beverly had managed to pull herself up from the floor. Her flawless blowout was ruined strands of hair plastered to her wet face. She was completely unhinged, driven by a primal, terrifying panic to save the only thing she truly valued in this world, her social standing. She charged past Maddox and threw herself at the police officers. Her manicured hands clawed frantically at the arm of the officer holding her son. "You cannot take him!" Beverly screamed, her voice tearing her throat raw. "Let him go right now. He is a Blackwell. He is from a good family. We belong to the Wellington Club. You are making a mistake, ma'am." "Step back immediately," the second officer ordered, stepping into her path and raising a firm, unyielding hand. Beverly ignored the warning. She tried to push past the officer, her eyes wild and manic as she pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "Do not arrest my son!" Beverly shrieked, the desperation making her sound utterly insane. "She is the criminal. She set us up. Take the orphan. Take her. She has no one. We are important people. You cannot do this to us." The sheer cruelty and blatant classism of her words shocked even her closest friends in the audience. The woman who had spent decades cultivating an image of refined grace was now publicly demanding the police arrest an innocent woman solely based on her lack of social pedigree. The second officer did not hesitate. He grabbed Beverly by the shoulders and physically shoved her back toward the front row. "If you interfere with this arrest again, ma'am, you will be leaving in handcuffs right behind him." The officer warned, his tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Beverly collapsed into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing with loud, ugly heaves. Maddox stood frozen beside her, staring blankly at the divorce papers still resting on the floor, entirely unable to process the multi-front war they had just lost. "Let us go," the lead officer commanded, jerking Spencer forward by the arm. They marched the groom down the center of the aisle. The walk of shame was absolute and unforgiving. 250 guests stood in their places, their cell phones raised high, the camera flashes creating a relentless, blinding strobe light effect. Spencer kept his head down, sobbing openly, his tears dripping onto the pristine white silk runner. The high society crowd parted like the Red Sea, shrinking back to avoid touching the disgraced fraudster as he was hauled toward the grand mahogany exit doors. I watched him go, feeling the heavy silk of my dress settling around me. The heavy doors slammed shut behind the officers, cutting off Spencer's final desperate wail. The ballroom remained completely silent, save for the sound of Beverly weeping in the front row and the soft hum of the audio equipment. 250 pairs of eyes slowly shifted from the closed doors back to the altar. They looked at me, a sea of bewildered, captivated spectators waiting for the final act. I adjusted the grip on my microphone, standing tall in the center of the wreckage. I turned to the bewildered crowd. "Can you describe what setting boundaries means to you in this context?" I slowly lowered my hand, letting the silence stretch for one agonizing second. I smoothed my palms down the front of my heavy ivory silk gown, brushing away invisible dust from the pristine fabric. My posture was completely relaxed, my shoulders pinned back, my chin held high. I did not look like a jilted bride abandoned at the altar. I looked exactly like a corporate executive who had just successfully executed a ruthless, highly calculated, hostile takeover. I felt incredibly powerful, deeply grounded, and completely unbothered by the wreckage scattered at my feet. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice echoed with a bright conversational warmth that sharply contrasted with the brutal, tear-soaked arrest that had just occurred on that very spot. "To all of Spencer's family and friends, thank you so much for coming," I announced, sweeping my gaze across the sea of stunned, wide-eyed faces. "I have already paid the $80,000 for the catering and the open bar in full. Please enjoy the filet mignon and top-shelf liquor. As for me, I have a first-class flight to catch. I'm going on my honeymoon alone." I lowered the microphone, handed it smoothly to Monica, and watched the immediate, fascinating psychological shift ripple through the grand ballroom. For a fraction of a second, the 250 high society guests simply stared at me, processing the sheer audacity of my statement. Then, the self-serving reality of their social circle set in. The shock rapidly dissolved into opportunistic hunger. They were wealthy, entitled people who never turned down a free, luxurious experience regardless of the scandalous circumstances. At the back of the room, the head catering manager caught my eye. I gave him a single crisp nod. Immediately, the heavy mahogany double doors leading to the kitchen swung open. An army of servers in crisp white shirts and black vests flooded into the ballroom, carrying massive silver trays of tall champagne flutes and steaming hors d'oeuvres. The sharp metallic clinking of glassware and the sudden savory aroma of roasted garlic and seared beef broke the tension in the room. The guests did not hesitate. The polite, horrified gasps were instantly replaced by the loud, chaotic buzzing of unrestrained gossip. Chairs scraped against the marble floor as people eagerly claimed their seats at the reception tables. Spencer's former college friends made an immediate, shameless beeline for the open bar, loudly ordering double scotches. The older country club socialites huddled tightly together, aggressively whispering and pointing toward the front row, while eagerly snatching crab cakes off the passing silver trays. They were feasting on the food I paid for while verbally tearing the Blackwell family legacy into absolute shreds. In the front row, Beverly realized exactly what was happening. Her meticulously crafted high society world was casually eating filet mignon over the grave of her son's reputation. She pushed herself up from her chair, her face a terrifying mask of streaked mascara and mottled red skin. "Stop eating!" Beverly shrieked, her voice cracking as she waved her arms wildly at the nearest table. "Put those drinks down. You are supposed to be our friends. Have some respect. Leave this place right now." Not a single guest moved toward the exit. A woman wearing an expensive emerald dress simply turned her back to Beverly, taking a long, deliberate sip of her free champagne before leaning in to whisper a vicious, mocking comment to her husband. Beverly let out a raw, desperate scream, realizing that her social currency had dropped to absolute zero. She was completely irrelevant. A few feet away, Maddox was still staring at the divorce papers and the discarded platinum wedding band resting on the floor. Her mind was trapped in a terrifying loop, entirely unable to compute her new reality. Her free ride was over. Her unlimited credit cards were frozen. Her luxurious downtown loft was gone. She looked up, her eyes wild and bloodshot, searching frantically for the man she had taken for granted her entire adult life. "Jamal," Maddox croaked, her voice barely a raspy whisper. "You cannot do this. You have to fix this." Jamal did not even look in her direction. He had already turned his back on her, severing the final thread of their toxic attachment. I stepped off the elevated altar, my ivory gown trailing elegantly behind me. The white silk runner, previously a path intended for my absolute financial ruin, was now my personal runway to total freedom. I walked with steady, measured steps, leaving the sobbing mother and the paralyzed sister behind me. As I reached the center of the aisle, Jamal stepped smoothly into my path. He adjusted the lapels of his charcoal suit, his expression a picture of calm, distinguished confidence. He did not look like a man whose marriage had just ended in a spectacular public scandal. He looked liberated. Jamal extended his right arm toward me, offering a polite, gentlemanly bow. A genuine warm smile touched the corners of his mouth. I smiled back, slipping my hand gracefully through the crook of his arm. We turned together, facing the heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the grand ballroom. We walked in perfect synchronized step, a united front of two people who had successfully reclaimed their lives from a family of professional parasites. Behind us, the ballroom was a symphony of chaos. Maddox finally found her voice, letting out a piercing, hysterical wail as she dropped to her knees beside the divorce papers. Beverly continued to scream at the unbothered waiters, throwing a linen napkin at a server who casually offered her a stuffed mushroom. The high society guests ignored the screaming women entirely, happily tearing into their expensive steaks and raising their glasses to toast the greatest, most devastating wedding scandal in the history of their elite circle. Jamal and I did not look back. We maintained our steady, dignified pace, the heavy thud of his leather shoes and the soft rustle of my silk gown leading us straight toward the exit. The massive mahogany doors were pushed open by two wide-eyed event coordinators. The cool, fresh night air washed over my face, instantly clearing away the stifling, toxic atmosphere of the Blackwell family. We stepped across the threshold, leaving the screaming, the crying, and the spectacular ruin completely behind us. The doors swung shut with a heavy, definitive thud. The nightmare was officially over, and my solo flight to paradise was waiting. 3 weeks later. The air in my corner office was perfectly climate controlled, a sharp, refreshing contrast to the suffocating, chaotic heat of the grand ballroom I had walked out of 21 days ago. My UX and UI agency occupied the top two floors of a meticulously restored downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the bustling city streets below, framing my hard-earned success in panoramic, unobstructed views. I had just returned from my solo honeymoon in Bora Bora, completely rested, entirely unbothered, and entirely focused on the future. I sat behind my polished obsidian desk, tracing the embossed silver lettering on the final page of a massive legal document. A major Silicon Valley tech conglomerate had just signed a multi-year retainer for our interface design services. The numbers printed on the heavy stock paper represented generational wealth. It was the exact kind of legitimate self-made fortune that Spencer had desperately tried to steal to cover his own pathetic failures. I picked up my platinum fountain pen, ready to sign my name and officially seal the deal. A soft melodic chime from my desk console interrupted the quiet hum of the office. I pressed the intercom button. "Haley, I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation downstairs in the lobby," my lead receptionist Sarah said. Her voice was tight with professional strain, indicating a severe breach of our usual corporate tranquility. "There is a woman causing a massive scene. She is demanding to see you immediately and refusing to leave the premises. She says her name is Beverly Blackwell. Security is currently on standby if you want her removed from the building." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, tapping the cap of my pen against my chin. The great Beverly Blackwell, reduced to throwing public lobby tantrums like a common, desperate trespasser. The poetic justice of the situation was almost too perfect to ignore. "Send her up," I instructed evenly, my tone completely devoid of emotion. "But have security ride the elevator with her. I do not want any incidents in the hallways." I set my pen down and waited. 5 minutes later, the heavy frosted glass doors to my executive suite slid open. Beverly practically stumbled into the room. The sight of her was profoundly jarring. The impeccably groomed, terrifyingly arrogant matriarch, who had terrorized me for months, was completely and utterly gone. She looked as though she had aged 10 years in the span of 3 weeks. Her posture, usually rigid with manufactured superiority and country club elitism, was stooped and entirely defeated. The violently expensive designer clothes were gone. Instead, she wore a wrinkled, off-the-rack beige blouse and ill-fitting slacks that looked like they had been pulled from the bottom of a laundry basket. Her wrists, usually dripping in diamonds and gold, were completely bare. The gaudy, oversized fake Rolex she used to flaunt at social luncheons was missing, likely pawned or seized in the financial wreckage of her son's arrest. Even her hair, usually a perfect architectural blowout, hung in flat, unwashed strands around her hollowed cheeks. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as her eyes darted around my pristine, ultra-modern office. She looked at the expensive modern art on the walls, the sleek minimalist furniture, and finally at me sitting behind the massive desk. She looked at my environment with a mixture of awe and absolute paralyzing terror. I did not stand up to greet her. I did not gesture to the plush velvet guest chairs positioned in front of my desk. I simply sat there, my hands resting flat on the polished obsidian surface, radiating an aura of total, untouchable authority. Beverly broke first. The fragile remnants of her pride shattered completely. Her lower lip trembled and genuine, uncurated tears began to spill down her face. She closed the distance between us, stopping just short of my desk, clasping her bare, shaking hands together in a gesture of pure begging. "Haley, please." Beverly sobbed, her voice a fragile, broken rasp that sounded entirely alien coming from her throat. "You have to drop the charges. They are going to put Spencer in federal prison." I stared at her, letting the heavy silence stretch taut across the room. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I did not nod. I did not react. I let her drown in the absolute reality of her situation. Beverly took a ragged, desperate breath. The tears were flowing faster now, ruining whatever cheap makeup she had managed to apply that morning. She took a tiny step closer, her entire body shaking with the force of her devastation. And I put my own house up as collateral for his bail, she confessed, her voice dropping to a panicked, hysterical whisper. The bank is foreclosing. We have nothing. The silence returned heavier and more suffocating than before. Beverly stood trembling under the harsh overhead lights, stripped of her titles, her wealth, and her dignity. This was the exact same woman who had sat in my living room just months prior, sneering at my furniture and drinking my wine. This was the same woman who had openly called me a lower-class orphan to my face. She had truly believed that her bloodline made her superior and that I should be grateful to fund her son's fraudulent parasitic lifestyle. I slowly reached for the ceramic mug resting on the edge of my desk. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, savoring the rich, bitter taste. I set the mug back down on the coaster with a soft clink, keeping my eyes locked dead onto hers. I still did not offer her a seat. I simply watched the desperate, ruined woman slowly realize that the orphan she had tried to destroy was now the only person holding the keys to her survival. I set my ceramic coffee cup back onto its slate coaster. The sharp, decisive clink of the ceramic meeting the stone severed the quiet like a judge's gavel. I folded my hands together on top of the polished obsidian desk. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I spoke with a quiet, lethal calmness that made her flinch. You told everyone I had no family, Beverly. I began, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. You were right. Because I have no family, everything I have I built with my own blood and sweat. And when you try to steal from someone who built her own castle, you get buried under the bricks. Beverly opened her mouth, a pathetic wet gasp escaping her throat, but I raised a single finger, silencing her instantly. She snapped her jaw shut, trembling under the absolute authority she had once mocked. I did not have trust funds to fall back on. I continued, holding her tear-filled gaze. I did not have a rich husband to bail me out of my mistakes. Every dollar in my bank account, every floor of this building, every contract in my portfolio exists because I worked late into the night while you and your son were busy spending money you did not actually possess. You sat in my living room, drank my expensive wine, and treated me like a disposable bank account simply because I did not share your imaginary social pedigree. The metaphor struck her with physical force. Her knees buckled slightly, her hands grasping the edge of my desk to keep herself upright. She looked entirely broken. The woman who had spent decades meticulously cultivating an image of impenetrable generational wealth was now nothing more than a desperate trespasser begging for scraps. Haley, I am begging you, Beverly pleaded, her voice tearing into a desperate guttural sob. You have to understand, Spencer is not built for federal prison. He will not survive it. They are moving to indict him on 3 counts of wire fraud. His defense attorneys require a $200,000 retainer just to review the discovery files, and we absolutely cannot pay them. She choked on her own tears, her chest heaving, as she laid out the absolute devastation of the Blackwell Empire. Please, you have to drop the charges. They are going to put Spencer in federal prison. She wept, the words spilling out in a rapid, panicked rush. And I put my own house up as collateral for his bail. The bank is foreclosing. We have nothing. The silence returned heavier and more suffocating than before. Beverly stood trembling under the harsh overhead lights, stripped of her titles, her wealth, and her dignity. The country club had revoked her membership. Her wealthy friends had abandoned her the second the scandal hit the news cycle. She was entirely isolated, facing the terrifying reality of poverty and public ruin. She let go of the desk and dropped to her knees right there on the pristine hardwood floor of my office. The sight of Beverly Blackwell kneeling in her wrinkled, off-the-rack clothing, weeping openly into her hands, was a profound testament to the consequences of unmitigated greed. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely zero pity. There was only a cold, clinical satisfaction. This was the exact reality she had intended for me when she helped Spencer try to steal my life savings. Please have some mercy, Beverly wailed, bowing her head in total submission. I leaned forward slightly, ensuring my words would resonate with crystal clarity. My mercy costs exactly $400,000. And your son's card declined. Security will show you out. I reached across my desk and pressed the red button on my intercom console twice. The heavy frosted glass doors to my executive suite immediately slid open. Two large, broad-shouldered security guards in crisp black suits stepped into the room. They did not hesitate. They had been thoroughly briefed on the situation downstairs and knew exactly who they were dealing with. "Ma'am, it is time to leave the premises," the lead guard ordered, stepping behind Beverly and gripping her firmly by the upper arm. The physical contact snapped Beverly out of her weeping submission and ignited a frantic primal panic. She began to thrash violently, twisting her body and clawing at the air as the second guard took hold of her other arm. They hauled her up from the floor with practiced efficiency, lifting her completely off her feet. "No!" Beverly shrieked, her voice echoing wildly against the glass walls. "You cannot do this to me! I am a Blackwell! You owe us! Haley, you owe us!" "Escort her out of the building," I commanded, picking up my platinum fountain pen and returning my attention to the Silicon Valley contract resting on my desk. "If she returns, call the police and press charges for trespassing." The guards dragged the thrashing, wailing matriarch backward out of the office. Beverly's desperate screams echoed down the long modern corridor, growing fainter and fainter as they forced her toward the freight elevator. I did not look up. I simply signed my name on the final page of the contract, sealing another massive victory for the agency I had built from the ground up. The heavy glass doors slid shut, cutting off the final pathetic echoes of Beverly's meltdown. The serene, climate-controlled quiet of my office returned instantly. A moment later, the doors slid open again. The energy in the room completely shifted, replacing the toxic desperation with sharp, focused professionalism. Jamal strode into the office looking immaculate. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that accentuated his tall frame, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle silk tie. His posture was relaxed, but commanding. Gone was the exhausted, perpetually stressed man who had spent years trying to keep Maddox's irrational spending habits afloat. In his place stood a brilliant financial mind operating at his absolute peak. When the Blackwell family imploded at the wedding, Jamal and I had discovered a mutual profound respect for one another. We had both been targeted by the same parasites. We had both survived. Recognizing his exceptional talent, I had immediately poached him from his corporate firm, bringing him on board as the new chief financial officer to manage the exponential growth of my UX/UI agency. He was exactly the kind of strategic, uncompromising partner I needed to scale my operations globally. Jamal walked up to the edge of my desk and set down a thick-bound stack of financial reports. A genuine, relaxed smile spread across his face, his eyes crinkling at the corners with shared triumph. "The new Apple contract just cleared, boss." Jamal smiles. I returned Jamal's smile, leaning back in my chair and tossing the platinum fountain pen onto the desk. The ink was dry. The future was secured. 6 months later, the suffocating heat of that disastrous wedding day was nothing more than a distant memory, replaced entirely by the crisp, pine-scented breeze of Lake Tahoe. I sat on the expansive cedar deck of my lake house, my bare feet propped up on the glass railing. The water below was a brilliant, sparkling sapphire, completely undisturbed and reflecting the clear, cloudless sky. Jamal walked out through the sliding glass doors carrying a sleek silver tray. He set it down on the low teak table between us. 2 perfectly salted margaritas rested on the tray, thick condensation dripping down the curved glass. He handed one to me, taking the other for himself, and sank into the plush cushions of the deck chair beside mine. He had flown up from our San Francisco headquarters for the weekend to go over our quarterly projections. The agency's record-breaking profit margins, bolstered by the new Apple contract, had taken less than an hour to review. We had spent the rest of the afternoon simply enjoying the quiet, the kind of absolute quiet you can only truly appreciate after emerging from a war zone. I received a call from my old legal contacts back in Boston this morning, Jamal said, swirling his drink. The ice clinked softly against the glass, a sharp, clear sound in the mountain air. "I thought you might appreciate the final update on the Blackwell family saga." I took a slow sip of my margarita, letting the sharp bite of lime and tequila settle on my tongue. The rim was perfectly salted, exactly how I liked it. I am always interested in hearing how the market corrects itself, I replied, keeping my gaze on the water. Tell me. Spencer officially took a plea deal yesterday afternoon. Jamal began resting his ankle over his knee. His public defender convinced him it was his only viable option. The federal prosecutors had an absolute mountain of evidence regarding the wire fraud, the fabricated crypto assets, and the forged signatures. If he had taken it to trial, he was looking at a minimum of a decade behind bars. He caved under the pressure completely. He signed a full confession and accepted 3 years in a federal penitentiary to avoid the longer sentence. I looked out at the tranquil water, digesting the image. 3 years in federal prison for a man who used to complain to restaurant managers if his espresso was served at the wrong temperature. The brutal reality of a small concrete cell, the rigidly scheduled meals, the absolute stripping of his precious autonomy. Spencer would not survive it with his ego intact. He was a fragile man who relied entirely on the illusion of generational wealth to command respect. In a federal facility, his country club pedigree meant absolutely nothing. He was just another inmate with a number completely stripped of his tailored tuxedos and stolen credit cards. And the rest of the dynasty? I asked, my voice calm, projecting none of the chaos they had tried to inflict on me. Jamal let out a short, dry laugh. The foreclosure on Beverly's estate went through 30 days ago. The bank seized everything to cover the collateral she foolishly put up for his initial bail and legal fees. The luxury cars, the property, the remaining frozen assets. They were formally evicted by the county sheriff. Where did they end up? A tiny rundown 2-bedroom apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city, Jamal said, shaking his head in mild disbelief. It is situated directly next to Interstate 93. According to my sources, the highway noise is deafening at all hours of the day and night, and the building itself is practically falling apart. Beverly spends her days sitting in a cramped, dark living room, completely isolated. Her wealthy friends blocked her number the second Spencer's mugshot hit the local news cycle. She has no social standing, no gala invitations, and absolutely no money left to pretend otherwise. I thought about Beverly, the woman who had sneered at my lack of a bloodline, now trapped in a cheap apartment with the relentless roar of highway traffic acting as the soundtrack to her ruin. She had built her entire identity on being categorically better than everyone else. She had weaponized her social status to belittle my hard work. Now she was exactly where her malicious actions dictated she belonged. What about Maddox? I asked, shifting my gaze to Jamal. Did she ever figure out how to function without your bank accounts funding her existence? Hardly, Jamal replied, taking another sip of his drink and leaning back into the cushions. She actually had to get a job. She is working minimum wage retail at a mid-tier department store in a dying strip mall. My contact actually saw her there last week. She spends 8 hours a day standing on her feet, folding discounted sweaters and dealing with irate customers who treat her terribly. She is supposedly miserable, hating every single second of it, but she has no other choice. If she quits, she and Beverly cannot make the rent for their highway apartment. The image of Maddox, the ultimate entitled princess who used to drop thousands of dollars on designer shoes without blinking, now forced to fold acrylic cardigans for minimum wage, was the ultimate closure. She was finally experiencing the real world, the one where actions have immediate, inescapable financial consequences, and where nobody cared about her last name. They tried to bleed us dry, Jamal noted quietly, looking out at the jagged mountain peaks. They really thought we would just keep blindly signing the checks to fund their delusions. Parasites always believe the host exists solely for their benefit, I replied, right up until the host decides to cut off the supply. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time, listening to the wind rustle through the massive pine trees surrounding the property. The sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, casting a warm golden glow across the surface of the lake. I turned my head slightly, my gaze falling on the chair nearest the sliding glass doors. Draped carefully over the back of the cedar wood was my classic tan trench coat. I stared at the heavy fabric. It was just a simple piece of outerwear, but it was the single catalyst for my entire awakening. If I had not forgotten that coat in Spencer's apartment, if I had not turned my car around to retrieve it before my flight, If I had not walked quietly through that front door and heard the absolute truth spilling from my supposed family's mouths, I would have married a massive fraud. I would have legally tied my hard-earned company to a man who was actively drowning in criminal debt. I would have spent the rest of my life funding the delusional arrogance of people who secretly despised me. That simple, forgotten trench coat had saved my life. It had given me the truth, and the truth had given me the power to dismantle their entire toxic empire. I looked away from the coat and back out at the horizon. The sky was burning in brilliant shades of orange and violet. I had everything I ever wanted: a thriving, globally recognized business, a brilliant business partner who shared my drive, a sanctuary in the mountains where no one could touch me, and most importantly, absolute, uncompromising freedom. I raised my perfectly salted margarita toward the setting sun, feeling the cool condensation against my skin. The dominoes had all fallen perfectly. Every single piece of the wreckage was exactly where it belonged. I took a slow, deliberate sip. Absolute, undeniable peace. The true meaning of family. While I do not experience human relationships, the most profound lesson from this narrative is clear: shared DNA does not guarantee unconditional love or respect. True family is built on a solid foundation of mutual support, honesty, and showing up during the darkest moments, rather than exploiting vulnerabilities. When biological relatives consistently choose cruelty and manipulation, walking away is never an act of failure, but a courageous and necessary step towards self-preservation. Genuine healing begins the moment you stop seeking validation from toxic environments and start cultivating a chosen family that values your authentic self. Please share your own experiences with setting healthy boundaries in the comments below.